I'm Chad Ruthermond.
I'm Andy Kinnick.
And I'm JJ Artemis.
And welcome to NOCLIP Pocket, the podcast where nobody has to die. Today, we're going to be talking about Undertale, which was a game that was developed by Toby Fox and released in 2015. Or, I guess as I worded it at the end of the last Pocket episode, what? Undertale?
You're such a luminary, Chad.
I know. So, yeah, this is our second time sitting down to talk about Undertale, and the first time was many, many moons ago.
Just lost to time.
It's our 10th episode.
It's entirely lost. Please do not find it. No, honestly, I think Dan, who's also been on this podcast, if you haven't heard him mention before, mentions Undertale as like one of his favorite episodes. So
I think it's because he loves conflict and he likes it when I make my whiny voice. I think he loves hearing me whine a lot, considerably.
That could be it.
Just what I mostly remember.
I kind of think of him as our collective mom, where I feel like he has to like it because he's our friend.
Right, that's a good point, but he holds it up above other clearly better episodes.
Mm-hmm. You really give Daniel too much credit in that regard. He would, and speaking personally, just tear me down as far as he needed to be correct and informative about a subject. So
that is true. But this is not really about Undertale. It's about us. So let's move on and talk about Undertale, the video game. So Undertale is a role-playing game, and on our last episode about it, I remember mentioning, I feel like 99.9999% of people who play through Undertale are going to probably get the neutral ending of Undertale. Then, after recording that episode, sometime in the ensuing 2 years, I watched an advertisement for Undertale. I'm backing down on that stance a bit.
Yeah, I remember one of my big takeaways from it was, JJ told me about it and was like, don't look up anything.
Right.
So I didn't even read the Steam page, and I knew literally nothing about it. And I feel like if you go to the game and you read the Steam page and you just read that tagline, the RPG where no one has to die,
right,
you're already going in with too much knowledge.
Yep.
I feel like part of what makes the game so interesting and engaging is that slow realization that is kind of the goal, or one of the goals of the game.
Yeah, I would honestly make the argument that that's sort of, it makes it enjoyable on a meta narrative level, because it's interesting to go in and not expecting it to be sort of a different kind of game and treat it like a regular game, in which case you end up in the situation that both Andy and I found ourselves in. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm speaking for you here, but we both liked it when we finished it. But I think if you look at just the text by itself, I think knowing what it's I don't think the game itself doesn't care so much about that meta narrative. It has its own metatextual jokes and things that it does, and that's sort of what it's built up around, but it is not about the experience of discovering that the game is different. I think they assume that you'll know that going in.
Yeah, it doesn't talk down to you in any way, in a very, very good way, and a sadly a little bit rare way, considering video games right now.
Yeah, I definitely think it's factored in there, given that if it calls you out on it if you already know how it works. Was both Chad and I played it a second time recently on the Switch, and if you dodge all the flower pellets at the beginning from Flowey, he's like, you know what's going on here, don't you? You get special dialogue for it. So yeah, it definitely is factored into the design of the whole thing.
I would also like to point out that this is actually the third time that I've been through the game, because the second time I attempted a true genocide run and am just a flat baby and am unable to finish. Not emotionally. I would gladly kill every denizen of the underworld again and again. The underground, whatever. Just like legitimately was very hard. I did not have the patience to keep retrying certain battles. So
Why have we decided to come back and talk about this again?
I think I suggested it. Like, I don't remember who came up with the idea to like revisit games, but the first one that came to mind when hearing about that was Undertale, because, as I said, I think we talked about this game like right as it was starting to get popular. Like, we were kind of like, we weren't ahead of the curve, but we were riding it.
yeah.
And I went in knowing nothing because JJ made sure that I did not. And I played through it so totally blind. And I remember because we were living at Winsley. Mm-hmm. You and Janelle had both gone home for the weekend. So I was just like by myself in the living room. I fired it up at like 6 p.m. and like played it straight through in one sitting to like 2. And I felt like I had like a really optimal experience with it. Like I really enjoyed it. And I expected to like it more than the both of you. And then we talked about it, and you both firmly liked it more than me. I remember, and I was really surprised by that because it felt like really weird and really niche to me. And then seeing the response of like how many people like fucking love this game and talk about it like it's a masterpiece is really like been a weird experience for me, given like my personal experience with it.
Including me, which is important context for this. I am 100% in on the this is a masterpiece camp that like overtook the internet in a very kind of annoying twee way in the early starts of 2017 and dialed back a little bit into its game status now, where I feel like it's at the optimal amount of cultural attention.
But MatPat gave a copy of it to the Pope. We
I
can't
forgot
just
all
ignore
about
that.
that. Jesus. I haven't thought about MatPat in like 2 years.
Yeah, let's continue not thinking about MatPat.
I honestly don't know who he is, but in the abstract, I do support the decision to send Undertale to the Pope. Not even ironically. Really think if I was going to send a game to the Pope, that would be the game I would select.
Didn't you meet him in person?
Wait, sorry, who are we talking to?
MatPat,
Me?
the Pope.
The Pope, yes.
Didn't MatPat meet you in person?
I thought legitimately, I thought you were asking me if I met Matt, if I had met him. And I was like, no, I don't know when I would have.
But anyway.
Have you met
cutting
the
all that.
Pope, Chad?
I have met the Pope, though. He's a nice guy. Yes, you did. So you did join the like internet cult of this is a masterpiece, and the fact that you bring it up as being like kind of a twee wave of love for this game is appropriate, but like I genuinely think, and I'm not saying this because we host a podcast about games and it would destroy our reputation if I lumped you in with everyone whose YouTube username is Sans Undertale. I feel like you have a more justified reason behind it. I still put the game sort of like solid. Like I would give this game probably like an 8 out of 10 if I was being IGN.com.
That is coincidentally exactly what Toby Fox would put the game at. Have
you ever seen both of us in the same room?
No, I have not. I've never seen Toby Fox in any room.
That's
in fact,
true. Yeah, he might not even be real.
He might,
or he could be me.
Those
Who
are your
knows?
2 options.
Yeah, those are the only 2 options.
I think technically, if he's you, he isn't real. Though that's kind of a weird.
I see what you're getting at with that.
Yeah.
But anyway.
This is the meta podcast content.
We were talking about me
you said
being
you would give it 8 out of 10, IGN.com.
Me
was
being
the
a
last
part.
serious thing that was said.
Well, I think because of that, because like I find this game to be like very good, but not like this is not in my top 10 list of games.
I feel like given the amount of time since Undertale's release, I have absolutely solidified its position in my life as my favorite game. And I want to do the best thing, the fun thing, which is, of course, to sell you guys on the prospect that Undertale is the best game ever made by anyone, by humans.
So you're saying, like, for presidential election, game president, 2020, Undertale I don't know who Undertale's vice president would be, like Earthbound.
Earthbound, yeah.
Yeah, Earthbound, yeah.
Okay, all right, well then go for it. Let's do it.
You have the floor.
Thank you. Okay. I feel like I want to go back to the source here. Because re-listening to your initial takes, one thing that really stood out to me really strongly is how much you both, at least initially, you can speak to your defense now, just completely missed the point of the game intentionally, almost like flagrantly, in a lot of your initial playthroughs. Really, this is the approach I'm taking. Is instead of convincing you, I'm going to just tear you down completely.
Sure.
Make sure you have no self-esteem.
I felt like in the original Undertale episode, I feel like it wasn't that I didn't get the point, it's that I kept having to argue against things that I disagreed with, so much so that I never got around to saying what I actually thought about the game.
Then say it.
Well, it's like I would have to rehash an entire conversation with them because we talked about it, we had this like whole like 20-minute segment about like if people who had never played games would like this game or all of that shit, and like but the things that I kept trying to get across was just like it has metatextual jokes in it, and it just became this whole argument about like I don't think people would understand shopkeepers. I don't know if people would... Like, it was nonsense.
All right. Then fuck that. Fuck all of this. Chad.
Yeah.
Why do you think this game is an 8 out of 10 specifically?
The reason I think this game is an 8 out of 10 is mostly because, like, I don't engage with it on a mechanical level in the way that I would like. I feel like the game... Also, having replayed it recently, I feel like the narrative is very, very straightforward in sort of, and it's weird. It's hard to judge because I feel like the true ending, the one that is like the desired outcome of playing through Undertale, is the true pacifist ending, which includes like extra content that adds this stuff that muddies the water of the plot of the like main game, things like the amalgamations and I don't think that any of the like weird glitchy stuff is considered to be like part of the game's narrative, but it's stuff that you access through the same methods, I guess.
The same window.
Yeah, which I choose kind of to ignore for the most part. I do appreciate that they give a little bit of characterization to the Alpha's character, who otherwise falls flat, but there are just stretches of this game that I don't really enjoy playing, and if those weren't there, maybe this would be a little bit higher up, but then the game would probably become too short to even really build the relationship that you want to have with it by the end. I don't know. I'm not sure. But that's really it. It's mostly a mechanical failing.
Okay. I do agree that this game really strongly doesn't hold up to multiple playthroughs of the same route, just because a lot of the actual meat of the moment-to-moment gameplay outside of boss battles is you trying to learn things about the random encounters and figure out how to overcome them, like socially, functionally. But once you already know that, the puzzle is solved, right? You're just given the same Rubik's Cube every time you go through.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like I echo a lot of what Chad said. I actually like the mechanics set quite a bit. Like, yeah, maybe it doesn't challenge me as much as I might like, but I'm kind of okay with that, because it's not really kind of what I'm expecting to get out of the game. But, yeah, I feel like this game's got, like, some pacing issues. Like, it's really great the first playthrough. Like, you kind of live in that little world, and it's, like, only a 6-hour game, and it's a pleasant experience that's very engrossing, like, a first time. But then if you get a neutral ending the first time, which you probably will, then you have to basically just play the game again a second time and get some new stuff at the end, which I view as kind of a problem. Or if you do the genocide run, that you get a lot of cool meta stuff, but that's, I feel like, the most boring version of the game, where you're just kind of like killing everything, like in terms of just like the actual game part, and it gets different at the end.
When it's specifically designed to be boring, at least in some aspects,
Right.
because like a lot of your time is spent just holding the up key against a wall in order to get steps to get random encounters, because it's not supposed to be something that's fun and enjoyable to do.
Right.
But it does have like the mechanical challenge. But I do want to, just as an addendum before we go back into it, add that like the parts of the mechanic set that I don't like are stemmed almost entirely from the fact that this game was made in Game Maker in the style that it is. Because I think that the way that the RPG systems work out, with the exception of the true pacifist run where you're not really engaging with like the golf game timing mini game, for the most part are exactly the same with the bullet hell elements. And I really like that implementation. I think that is great, and I enjoy that, and I engage with that. And as I've shown, it's impossible to beat things in the genocide run, so it isn't the challenge that I really like took issue with, because when they challenged me, I crumpled like a wet paper bag.
I really do love the base mechanical implementation of this game. I feel like it manages to find a fusion that takes the best things from turn-based combat and action RPG combat, and puts it in a framework that they get to subvert later. And that, as I get older, I'm finding that increasingly to be the difference between good games and great games from my experience. It's games that build up their own walls, metaphorically speaking, what you think to be the limits of the game, and then blowing that out of the water repeatedly and expanding the size of the room over and over again. Because, I mean, you can have a fantastic, engaging mechanic set, and obviously, like, shmups are a proven track record. It is hard, even on the normal playthroughs. Like, it was really tense going into the last two final bosses of that game for me to be able to get through, and I lost several times on the Flowey fight. But it has, in Undertale's case specifically, you get that tension and that active control in the defensive sections, and you get pacing breaks in times when the game wants you to have a pacing break. So for random encounters, like, you'll have just short bursts of you having to dodge and actually, do the difficult thing. And then you get kind of like a little snippet of like humor or jokes or character information and a time to breathe. But when the game wants to take that time away from you, it does. And because the game initially shows you the play field is just this tiny square in the center of the screen surrounded by art, it literally gives you like most of the screen to keep expanding outward in terms of spectacle as the game goes on. And the spectacle does get crazy. Even I think that it gets like too crazy by the true pacifist ending. I actually prefer the neutral ending to the final ending, like, narratively speaking. I think it makes a much better point, especially if you keep Flowery as just kind of his own ingrained antagonist. But
I say my favorite thing that they do in terms of like subverting the way the combat system works is in the Sans fight, the very end where you have to move the box.
Yeah.
All the way down to the fight button. Like, that's the cherry on top for me.
Yeah, and this game does shit like that constantly. It removes the box entirely once you get into the Photoshop Flowey fight. I mean, we could list all day the number of like stupid subversions in mechanics or in narrative that the game keeps trying to do.
And also Asgore breaking the mercy button is also a good moment.
Yes. And that, I feel like, is what I'm normally looking for to elevate a game that is just funny, just pretty, just fun to listen to, from something that is memorable, because it creates a moment of shock that honestly most games' narratives aren't really able to give me. Like, I'm not in this game for the reasons that a lot of the publicized reasons that people say. I'm not like, oh god, I fucking love Sans. Isn't Sans so cool? I don't.
He is.
Yeah.
No.
Like, I mean, the characters aren't bad by any means. I agree with everyone that Alphys is the one that like falls flat comparatively of all of them. And I do think a lot of the characters in the specific jokes are like definitely endearing, definitely funny enough to like form a kind of connection that is generally speaking not present in a lot of these kind of narrative attempts. But it's not like the story of Undertale is what I'm there for. It's the way that Undertale plays with the player that I'm there for. And that is just not an experience I've ever gotten anywhere else. And I doubt I'm going to get it anywhere else for a very, very long time. Like, Honestly, one of the saddest things about replaying this game for me wasn't just knowing that I would never get back the pure innocence of my pre-Undertale days, but that I was playing it on a Switch screen and not on the computer, where they weren't able to implement the really subversive shit that you do from working on with a PC. Like the game automatically closing, messing around with aspect ratios and shit, all the stuff that you do when the game really wants to get in your face.
It does make it a lot more of it makes it a much smoother experience overall, which I think is probably what it was designed for in, like, on the console ports. But yeah, I agree. Like, some of the stuff that it can do, there are lots of games on PC that I would like that just couldn't work on console because they can't fuck with your file system or anything. Like,
even outside of files, like presentation wise, the fact that this game on PC opens not in full screen is such a genius fucking decision to me, because it contextualizes, it makes itself seem initially more like the tiny Game Boy game that it wants you to assume that it is. It starts with like just the opening crawl that honestly gives me like Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance flashbacks for their little opening crawl thing. About like legends and lore and stereotypical myths on this tiny little pixelated screen that's in front of you.
Right.
And then you have to figure out how to expand it, and you have to figure out how to engage with it. It makes it seem like more of the secret lost thing that it was in 2016 before it like took over the world.
Yeah, I'm not going to like sit here and tell you that everything you just said is wrong or anything, because I agree with most of it. Like, that's a lot of why I like the game as well. Is like all that unique stuff that it does. And I think I've said multiple times, just like recently even, that like as I get older, genuinely unique and unexpected experiences are what endear me to games a lot. But there's something about like Undertale I think is great on its first playthrough, but then once you kind of like seen the man behind the curtain, it falls down a bit. Like, the True Pacifist run wasn't as satisfying for me as I thought it would be. Like, that first playthrough is really what I think of when I think Undertale, when I didn't know what was going on.
Agreed.
And that kind of takes a little away from it for me. Which is probably why I would also give it an 8 out of 10, IGN.com.
no, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. I just think that, man, this is, once again, I feel like I've been put in a position where I have to like dunk on this when I don't want to.
Then don't dunk. I would rather you take the time to just express the game to your limits, where you think it hits for you and what you think it does well, because the kind of shit that you care about is so goddamn different than the kind of shit that I care about.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, I guess my main hang up here is that I don't disagree that I like things that sort of like go outside the context of what a game typically does, and whether that's visually, tonally, or through its like its use of save systems and terminology and shit like that. That Undertale all does pretty well. It just like, I guess it just doesn't impress me in a way that I could potentially be impressed. Like, there are games that have done similar things. The one that I've talked about, like literally a year ago, that left messages on my desktop that does a similar thing. And but like, that unnerved me in a way that Undertale just is incapable of doing. I overall prefer the tone of Undertale. I think that it's very good, and the way that they implement the dialogue into both your like having a chat with a guy and also into the combat system makes it unique in that way, and in a way that it encourages you, I guess, to engage more in like actual characterization. It makes you want to, even if you don't engage with the enemies, that you're sort of like solving the puzzle of how to, beat them peacefully. You still come out of it and go like, man, this game is just like all about talking to people, and like whether you're thinking about it or not, subconsciously that's going to make you want to interact with the NPCs and like the main characters a lot more than you would in a lot of other games. My thing is, I feel like you're at the very least a little bit in luck that I don't think that it's going to be long before you experience something else that is Undertale-esque. Like, these types of games, like, we saw Undertale become really huge, And I think that people are taking cues from that, and not just like Lisa, right, which is another Earthbound inspired RPG that goes in like the tangential opposite direction that Undertale did, with the same sort of formula. But even like games that like to share a tone with Undertale or like to do the same sort of meta things, like just
Doki
last
Doki
year,
Literature Club.
yeah,
Yeah.
DDLC exploded last year. And we played it, and it's fine. Like we didn't do like an episode on it. Like it didn't leave that much of an impression on us necessarily.
No.
But I think those are steps in the right direction. This is just one of those like we have an exemplary game using all of these things, and I think that it's going to become more and more normal as time goes on.
Yeah, and playing Undertale, it really like kind of scratched an itch that it was always kind of there, but I never really expected to be scratched. Because I remember always like playing Pokemon, and I don't know why it's always really stood out in Pokemon, and it always has for me. Where I'd beat the game, and the way it starts you over in your house makes it seem like you beating the Elite Four is canon, but then the game never acknowledges it, right? You can
Right.
go back and fight them a million times, it'll play out the same way. For some reason, lots of games do that kind of thing, but it always really stood out to me there. And it always made me think, like, it would be cool if, like, the game would actually, like, acknowledge what I do in it. And I think that's a feeling that, like, everyone's had, and that Undertale, it feels like it's one of the first games to like really deliver on that idea.
It's, in my mind, one of the reasons it was able to go so far with delivering on it is because the game was immediately, like moment one, willing to concede that a fail state in a video game doesn't have to be a stop in progression. Like, I remember one thing that you guys talked about in the last episode as well was how after the early game, where all of us, everyone present, killed something while we were trying to understand the mechanics and get ourselves built forward,
Right.
is that there was like regret that we couldn't take that back, that we couldn't do something to like get some kind of forgiveness to what we had done. But I feel like part of the point of Undertale, a hard lesson though it may be, is that the fail state of Undertale didn't stop you from continuing to move forward. Mm-hmm. Like the fail state of Undertale was that point. It was the murder. And you internally have to recognize that from the messages that the game is trying to tell you. And most of the rest of the runtime of any playthrough that you are with Undertale where you kill something is the game telling you that was bad. Like, it's not a waste of your time either, in the same way that, like, say, being behind in like an RTS or something would be, where you know that you can't win but you can still play out the simulation. It's not like that, because the remainder of the time you have with the game, even after hitting that fail state, is still incredibly valuable. Like, not just because like the base, like, oh, I'm dodging around bullets in a video game, all these jokes are funny, but the game is like actually trying to like teach you something about its message and the way that it feels about nonviolence and having faith in other human beings in the world. Like, it was a game that was still fun after you've lost it, and it was a game that still had something to say after you lost it, so you can come back, try and beat it again.
Yeah, that's becoming more and more popular as well. Like, I'm sure there's games that did it before, but the obvious recent touchstone is Demon's Souls, that like popularized let's contextualize death and make it part of like the struggle of the character and part of the narrative and tone and stuff. And yeah, that kind of thing is becoming more and more popular as well.
I feel like we've now gone like 3 or 4 skips away from where this comment would have been appropriate to insert.
Uh-huh.
But I do at least want to call out that while Undertale definitely does have a end game that is like, that acknowledges, and it goes a few steps further, because it acknowledges even like the time that you've spent not in the game, so to speak, and like if you quit the game or if you come back knowing what's going on, like it basically is like, oh, you've played Undertale before, like you get to do this shit now. you may have felt like that when you played Pokemon, when you finished the game and went back and nobody said anything. But like really the root of this in Undertale is Earthbound, because Earthbound has you can go talk to every single NPC in the whole game and they'll give an update on what they're doing. So I just don't want to like unfairly be like Undertale basically invented NPCs having different dialogue.
Well, that's not what I was trying to say.
Yeah, and I'm being hyperbolic,
Yeah.
but
And I didn't even specifically mean the game acknowledging you beating it, but just like responding to, like legitimately responding to the choices you make. And like the fact that you can go to like any different room and call Papyrus and it'll make a comment on it, like that level of like attention to detail is something that like I feel like I always wanted, and that Undertale kind of delivers on.
Like, it's such, even outside of the game, like it's such like a hopeful story to some extent, right? Like, this is something that provided on exactly what you wanted on a narrative level within the constraints of super indie development, where most of the things that you were looking for could be iterated on with just enough text and time, and they went far enough to provide that, and it exploded everything. It was all over the place, right? Like, we don't hear stories about that often. The kind of indie games that normally succeed are the kind of indie games that become darlings with big publishers and manage to get some amount of E3 coverage, right? Like, they're included in press reels because, rightfully or otherwise, big publishers want to believe that they are being open to that kind of marketplace after the 360 era. But like, Undertale wasn't even that. Undertale was just like a thing on a PC that some guy who hung around a bunch of like Earthbound like fan mod communities put out into the world, and it kept going further. And that's a cool story.
yeah, no, I agree. And like for about like a quarter of the thing that you were saying there, I was like trying to determine, like I was like the story of Undertale, not the story of the making of Undertale. So like I just like blacked out for a good like 5 seconds there. I was like, oh wait, this is a different thing that I need to respond to instead.
I'm very sorry, Chad.
It is cool, and I assume that it did well enough. This is not even something that I need to assume. It just factually did.
He's a
do
millionaire.
this well.
Yeah.
Because it's been 3 years without really anything from the guy until recently.
Yeah.
So
Until Deltarune.
right.
Which is unfortunately a game I'm going to have to wait so long for more of, because he wanted it to be in color. Damn it, I don't care about color.
Yeah, no, I don't really care about color either. And it also seems
I'm a
like
pretty big fan of color.
but it's also something that we're going to be talking about more in depth later. Do we have final thoughts?
I guess I'll go first. You saying earlier that you didn't want to dunk on the game made me remember what I was gonna say that I forgot earlier, was that I think depending on who you are, like whether or not you really like that kind of meta commentary is going to determine like how much this game really sticks with you. Because I feel like that's a thing that you, JJ, would be really into, because also given the fact that like you like the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya so much, because you're like really appreciate like the satire, and like I'm not ever been a fan of like Deadpool, because I'm not a huge fan of like fourth wall breaking, but like if you're into those kinds of things, I think Undertale's gonna land better with you, which might be why it's JJ's favorite game of all time, because he tends to like that kind of stuff.
I do. But I like them mostly when they have a point. You bringing up melancholy is almost kind of like, I wouldn't say personal embarrassment. It's always been a touch of a guilty pleasure for me. But that's a great example of something that's trying to be meta in that way without that strong of a point in being meta. That show has other things it wants to say, but when it goes meta, it's doing that mostly for the joke. And Undertale does it for the joke very often, but it does it primarily to say something about you, the player, and the way you've historically engaged with games of this type over time. And it really earned that meta-ness in a way that a lot of games that try to be meta, in my experience, can kind of get rocky with. Like even something that as critically loved as like Spec Ops gets into trouble when people are like, you kind of forced us to do that at that one point. Like it's really hard to iterate on that kind of direct player commentary well, and it's really easy for it to break and fall apart. But I honestly never think it does in Undertale. Like, it has its message. It isn't trying to tell you to like keep replaying the game over and over again. It stays for as long as it needs to stay, and has impacted my life forever.
All right, but anyway, to my actual final thoughts.
Man, did I think that was going to somehow go to me after that?
Me too, actually.
For me, I very much enjoy this game, and I felt like I came off too negative on it on the original episode because I was so taken aback by how much you guys liked it, and then in turn how much the world seemed to like it. And the game will always kind of have that, like, attached to it for me, like not necessarily negative or positive, but just weird. Always makes me think about that. But yeah, this game is, I mean, it's great. If you haven't played it and you listen to this, why did you do that?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that sucks to be you. You'll never get to experience Undertale.
I feel like we spoiled literally nothing in this episode.
You be the judge, listener. Tell us how much we ruined for you.
Yeah, I think that reading one sentence on the Steam page ruins the game for you. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, so I mean, yeah, it's great, and we've talked about that at length at this point, and I guess I'll leave it at that.
I don't think that I could like possibly have a final thoughts on Undertale that follows sort of like the overall tone of what we're trying to get across here. Like, I agree with everything that we said about it in like broad strokes, but I don't know. I guess am probably one of the people that Undertale didn't land in its intended way. For me, Undertale is just a 6-hour, very enjoyable experience. And like none of the meta text or anything really puts it above and beyond, at least in my opinion. So a lot of my positivity on this game comes from just how like genuinely interesting and unique and well made the game overall is. And then sometimes you have to like play the hotland part of the game, and then that part kind of sucks.
That is a weak point.
Yeah, but aside from that, I think that, all right, you've convinced me. 8.5.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun.
Thank you for listening to NOCLIP Pocket this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, as I'm sure whatever branding we put on this episode is going to make clear, we're going to be talking about episode 1 of Deltarune.
My invasion of Pocket continues.
Yes. And then there will be a long break where we do lots of stuff that won't involve JJ, and everyone will be happy about it.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, also, potentially the next Pocket slot episode before the Deltarune episode, in case that's what we meant by next time, but who knows, because we don't even know. Could be Andy attempts to explain to me what happens in Kingdom Hearts up until Kingdom Hearts 3.
You didn't tell me this plan.
We just had it recently.
Oh, yeah, you
had it as if it was a child.
Birthed smiling into the world.
Birthed by sleep, smiling into the world. See you guys later. Wait, hold on.
It was but 358 over 2 days ago.
It was 2 days
that
ago.
It was birthed by sleep into this world.
Recoded.
Key.
Until that time, if you want to get a hold of us, all of our contact information is on noclippodcast.com. There you can find all of our old episodes, links to our YouTube. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play. Please, please, please give us a review. It gives a huge help. I'm trying to talk too fast. That is what I have. Now I think we've been going too long.
All right.
Smash that like button. Etc. We can't. That's not even our joke, man. Like that's just a thing.
Why are you so fucking sad today?